This is the voiceover presentation for Chapter 10 in the Rothermel textbook on global strategy. Global strategy explores how differences among country environments impact strategic decisions. We'll explore these differences through the CAGE framework, an acronym for cultural, administrative, or political, geographic, and economic elements of a country's settings. We'll then look at the integration responsiveness framework for a general description of how firms respond to those differences. To begin, doing business internationally creates a wide range of opportunities, but comes with significant challenges. The potential advantages and disadvantages range across the value system. In the search for inputs, such as abundant or inexpensive raw materials or labor in the form of low-cost workers or specialized experts, foreign countries may have much to offer. However, accessing another country's physical and human resources means that the company will also have to abide by the country's dictates. Similarly, in the process of transforming raw materials into finished goods and services, foreign countries can offer manufacturing sites, access to highly trained people that can advance a firm's technologies, and flexibility of the production sites add to a global network of operations. However, managing far-flung operations comes with the risk that the host governments or in-country partners can take advantage of the investments made by that foreign company. Last, every firm loves the idea of selling goods and services in new markets, even if local competition often starts with the advantage of being based in that host country. Global strategy examines these opportunities and threats by accounting for the differences between countries, differences that are important enough to cause companies to adjust their strategic decisions in the pursuit of overall performance. Consider a firm that has operations in 3 countries, the United States, China, and Germany. Even if that firm is pursuing a unified set of strategic goals, it would manage people, interact with customers or suppliers, or work with banks differently across those 3 countries. And there are really 3 big sources of differences among countries. The first is their economic conditions, the second is the cultures that exist within them, and the third are their political economic structures. Your text uses the CAGE framework to discuss these differences. On this slide, I've reproduced the CAGE elements as they were presented in the original reference article. I'll add my own spin on the 3 of them, and since geographic distance isn't really all that interesting, I will not discuss it in this presentation. The author of the CAGE framework discussed economic, cultural, and political elements in terms of distance. I like this perspective. The bigger the distance between countries, the bigger the difference between how firms operate within them. So let's start with economic conditions. Michael Porter, after finishing up his work on industries and firms, moved on to consider the differences in performance among countries. He did the exact same type of thinking process with countries as he did with industries and companies. This time the question was, why do some countries or regions perform better in some industries than others? His response, like the 5 forces model, was a depiction of structural forces in the form of the diamond model. There's one thing that's very important about this model to remember. It doesn't look at a country in general, but at a country or region from the perspective of a particular industry. For example, Dalton, Georgia has become known as the carpet capital of the world because of major manufacturers located there, like Mohawk and Shaw, but it is not a center of excellence for any other industry. Just carpet. So the diamond model for Dalton would be very different for something like technology or banking than it is for carpet. So the diamond describes how a country or region is set up for success in a particular industry. I'll briefly cover the 4 elements of the diamond model here, but please see the textbook for further details. Factors of production are simply the ability of a country to support the activities of an industry. Those factors of production come in either basic forms, such as raw materials, or advanced form, such as the availability of people with advanced training and skill sets. Demand conditions are how much an industry's customers require advancements from it. This means that the companies in the industry will face constant pressure to improve in order to satisfy their customers. While perhaps difficult to meet, this constant pressure to improve will drive an industry to greater levels of global success. Related and supporting industries, on the other end of the value system, push an industry along. If the suppliers from which an industry buys things are very advanced and move rapidly, the industry in question has a better chance of being highly competitive. And last is the firm's strategy, structure, and rivalry, a description of the general business environment underlying industry activities. The availability of helpful banks and technology providers and support of government policies, for example, make it easier for a group of companies to pursue excellence. Porter actually directed his diamond model at politicians. His advice to them centered on creating environments that fostered clusters of firms in the same industry so they could support one another. He was particularly concerned with creating incentives for people of similar skill sets to co-locate, which provides the seeds for an industry to flourish. From the perspective of foreign companies, analysis of the diamond model influences a firm's strategic decisions about where to locate activities. It provides a framework for analyzing potential country locations. By looking at the 4 points of the diamond, firm can seek out countries or regions that have the resources and expertise to contribute to their own strategic performance. This leads to better investment decisions. And foreign firms can create a solid standing with host governments if they can demonstrate how their own investments into the country can actually spur the country's success by adding to the activity of clusters they support. Moving on to culture. The different versions of defining the term culture all seek to describe how a group of people view the world around them and the norms, values, and behaviors that they share. When we study culture from a global strategy perspective, the objective is to understand how people approach business activities and decisions to work with them better. There are a number of different ways of describing culture. I'll highlight two. Imagine meeting somebody from a different country for the first time. One way to start to get to know them would be to ask them where they're from. If you know something about the culture of their country, you can make guesses about characteristics of that person. The other would be to ask what that person is interested in or what groups they affiliate with. Once you know what the person finds important, you have something to talk about. The first represents a top-down approach to understanding culture. Here you learn something about the group and then assume that those characteristics are shared by the individuals that are part of that group. Hofstede's cultural dimensions, which is briefly discussed in your text, takes this perspective. Hofstede was an industrial psychologist who gathered an enormous amount of data from people who worked for IBM around the world. From that data, he differentiated among countries based on these 6 dimensions. So if you know where each country rates on these dimensions, you have a starting point for knowing something about individuals from those countries. Your text provides a few more details about the 6 individual dimensions. The second approach groups people by their interests, or what's important to them, rather than their nationality. Schwartz was a psychologist who wondered if there was a set of universal values that all people shared. He came up with this list of what he called 10 basic values that he said were of varying importance to all people. In this case, you get to know somebody by understanding what's important to them and then inducing characteristics about the groups that they likely belong to. Regardless of the approach, the point is to speed up the process of moving from ignorance to a relationship. But be aware that these generalizations can be dangerous if the guesses turn into determinations. When we say all people from Germany are, as in Hofstede, that can quickly become all people of this ethnicity are. And when this happens, the helpful generalizations can become harmful stereotypes. But when used properly, these starting point generalizations can lead to insights about the best way to work with people or signals of when things are going right or wrong, and then how to help people learn to work with one another. This is the point of cultural analysis. Last is the idea of politics. Governments impact business in a country by establishing the laws, regulations, and tax codes that dictate what is permissible and what is not in that country. Essentially, governments set the rules of the game for economic activity in their countries, as well as trade policies governing transactions that cross country boundaries. And as indicated by the Cage framework, the more distant or different is a political system, the harder it will be for foreign companies to understand it. But business people, like lawyers and accountants, are very good at figuring out the most advantageous moves once the rules are known. The real challenges arise when the rules might change, and change in unpredictable ways. This is the essence of political risk. While there's always a degree of change in politics in every country at all times, some of that change is more disruptive than others. For example, the United States has a presidential election every 4 years, and there are definitely shifts when someone new is elected, but there are rarely significant disruptions in our country. Political upheavals can be much more dramatic. Think of the Arab Spring in the early 2010s, or the war in Ukraine, or countless other places in which there are conditions of great uncertainty. In these cases, businesses very much pay attention to how things are changing. And the challenge is not necessarily to mitigate the changes or predict the changes because they often can't be stopped, but firms can be ready to deal with the changes once they occur. And this requires people and systems that are paying attention to country dynamics and ready to move once the future becomes clearer. So the consideration of politics starts with becoming deeply familiar with the rules of the game, but being ready to adjust as is prudent. Taken together, the CAGE framework prompts executives to ask detailed questions about foreign countries and their ability to support the ambitions of the firm, breaking things down by economic, cultural, political, and if the firm is in manufacturing, the geographic distance between a firm's home countries, and perhaps the countries in which it already has locations is a great starting point for exploring the best places for the firm to access opportunities in foreign markets while minimizing the challenges that might arise when doing so. Firms put the finding of the CAGE framework into action when they build strategies for operating internationally. This graphic has been a standard in international strategy for decades. It discusses 4 general approaches a firm might take to operating in its international markets by using the distinctions between high responsiveness to country particularities or a more global approach in which country differences do not influence company decisions all that much. I refer you to the textbook for details on the 4 approaches: international, global, multi-domestic, and transnational. But these general approaches to doing business globally kind of gloss over an important point. Firms do not have to take the same approach to international business for all elements of their businesses. Refer to this graphic from the chapter that was used to describe market entry. The point of the graphic is to note that once a firm has chosen to enter a foreign country, there are lots of ways to do so. Selecting the right one depends not only on the broad approach to global business that a firm is utilizing, but also the function that is the focus of the international move. By that I mean that a single firm could use more than one means of entry into a country. For example, using exporting to sell products in small countries, wholly owned subsidiaries for sales in large countries, and perhaps a joint venture for manufacturing in a low-cost country. Because of the differences among countries, as highlighted by the CAGE framework, firms get very creative when designing their locations around the world. And this leads to multinational corporations. MNCs are complex networks of operations around the world. Each location might be a central hub of activity or a location with specific strategic mandates. These locations really have dual performance targets. They should do excellent work as a unit with a specific mandate within a particular country, but more importantly, they also must contribute to the performance of the MNC as a whole. What characterizes MNCs are these 3 elements. They have wholly owned operations in many countries. Those operations are differentiated by the country in which they are located and the role that they play. And those varied operations work together in a linked and coordinated way. MNCs evolve into these complex structures by specifying their entry into countries based on a match between their strategic needs and the nature of the country. As described by the CAGE framework, even as each unit is always supposed to support the overall strategic goals of the MNC. To summarize, we study global strategy to understand how country business environments differ from one another. The chapter uses the CAGE framework as a starting point to explore economic, cultural, political, and geographic distances between one country and another. Within each of those 4 categories, we can bring additional tools to understand them. For example, we used Porter's Diamond Model to further explore economic conditions for an industry within a country. Those differences among countries create opportunities as well as challenges for companies as they pursue their global ambitions. When companies evolve into complex networks of operations, we call them multinational corporations. These companies have a diverse array of units around the world, even as the performance of each unit contributes to the overall performance of the company. And this concludes the presentation.